everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Iterative podcast. My name is Hsu Ken. I'm one of the managing partners at Iterative. Iterative is a YC-style accelerator focused exclusively on Southeast Asia. Today, we're going to talk about how to find good startup problems to work on. This is a question that we often talk to people who start companies but don't have ideas. And we always suggest that they should look for problems. So we're going to cover a lot of those frequently asked questions today. I'm joined by Brian Ma, who is my partner at Iterative. Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. This is Brian. So me and Hsu Ken started working together, 15 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Did our first company for 5 years, sold that to eBay. We also worked on our second company together, which was a Y Combinator company. Also got that acquired. And then we kind of split up. Hsu Ken went to work for, I started another company in the US. And so between both of us, we've had a ton of, I'll say a ton of failures in working on company stuff. But all the companies have been pretty successful. So we're now turning the tables and trying to help other founders.
Bima, you want to give a little bit about Divvy and just what it did, just your most recent one?
Sure. So Divvy's my third company. It's still operating and doing quite well. So we're a real estate company that essentially modernized a rent-to-own. We help someone purchase a home 3 years before they can get a mortgage, and then we ramp them up into buying the entire home. We're funded by Andreessen. We're also funded by GIC. We've raised quite a bit of money, and we today buy probably 6 homes per day, all cash. And so, yeah, helping quite a bit of people ramp up to become homeowners.
What's really funny? I find I do this too. Whenever people are like, "Hey, can you talk about your company?" You go into the scripted pitch you've said so many times. Whenever people are like, "What did this side do?" I'm like, "Okay, here's the
yeah."
Okay, so I think we got a list. We got a couple questions here that we get asked a lot. So I think we're just going to go through the list and talk about them. They're pretty meaty, and so I think we can spend quite a lot of time digging into them. Okay, so the first one is, why is it important to focus on problems and not solutions? Which I think is advice that we give to a lot of people. What is your take here?
Yeah, I mean, this one's really obvious to me now after doing so many companies. I think it's just it's really easy for you to get lost when you've built something and you're searching for a problem for that thing that you've built. And the other way around, it's just much easier. And I think the reason why this is the case is because the search space is much smaller when you identify a problem and then you're trying to have different solutions to fit it, rather than the reverse. Do you see the same thing, Hsu Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's I feel like if you, I think there's a little bit of a trap here too, right? Where it's I think when most founders start, they think of solutions because you're used to thinking about features, right? You're I want a thing that does this. And so I think most people start that way, and it takes, you get down the road a little bit when you start focusing on problems. I think problems will help guide you a lot more than the solutions, right? So if you start with the problem, I think it will give you the parameters to find solutions. And if you start with the solution, it's not that helpful of a guide to finding problems. And so I think it's a much more productive place to start with problems. And you and I have been through so many pivots. It's if you're working on a problem, you can work through different solutions to try to solve that problem. But if you're just working on a solution, it's pivoting the problem seems weird. But I don't know if that was that obvious to us in the beginning. Do you think it was that obvious to us?
No, it was totally not obvious. I mean, just to help the audience a little bit more. So me and Hsu Ken started the company Decide. Decide was really interesting because I think we messed up. So we started with a problem, which was my wife was on Nordstrom, and she was checking every single day on dresses or sales, etc. And we're okay, cool. Why don't we just build? something for you that would like check it for you every single day, so you know when the sales happen, you can go purchase it. And then very quickly we're like, oh wow, that like we built something. It was so easy. It was we need to build something like smarter. And so we were like, okay, why don't we just predict the prices of these kind of like articles of clothing? So that's exactly what we did. It was an amazing solution. We were able to predict prices at like 80% accuracy or something like that. And then I feel like, and then we raised money on it. And then after raising money, we kind of like were locked into this thing that we had. And we were like, okay, cool. How do we apply this? Like, are we going to build Hsu Ken's grinning because he like now remembers all this.
Yeah.
Like, do we build like a shopping comparison site? Do we build like a retail store? Do we build like a mobile app? Do we build like, is it like a Chrome extension? Like who wants
the Chrome extension?
Yeah. Do like parents want this? Do like kids want this? And so I actually think that was like a much harder way to build a business than the reverse, right? Which was like when like I just want to know when sales happen. So like build something for me there. Before you jump in, I think the like the craziest thing after thinking back on this is like we just didn't realize that when people went shopping, they don't want to wait. They just want to buy something now. And so I think that was kind of like, that made our solution really hard to go like apply to something that we didn't kind of like really understand. So
I have two things. One, I have told that story about your wife so many times. I feel like, does she know that she's like famous? I've literally probably told 1,000 people about her in that dress. And does she know that we tell that story that way?
I'm not sure. Probably.
Okay. And then I think the second part, actually to your point, remember when we had we had the realization, we were like, so remember when we started out and we were like, we predicted buy or wait. So kind of for the audience, we did a bunch of fancy math in the back, but we wanted to boil it down into a recommendation we could make people. And it basically was buy or wait. If we predicted that the price was going down, you should wait for the price to go down, you get a cheaper price. If we thought that the price was going to stay the same or go up, we told you to buy, right? So it was either the best price now or like, why bother waiting? And remember when we first did the initial models, I think we predicted wait like a small minority of the time, right? It was it like 15%, something like that?
Probably less, yeah.
Yeah, probably less. And we had this like existential question of like, we don't actually save people money if we tell them to buy. And we actually only save people money 15% of the time. Like, can you actually like build a company around that? Like, is that useful enough? And I think we kind of just got enamored with like what we did, which was the wait part. And I think, we 2 years in or a year in, we found out that like people really wanted to like the buy recommendation. Like we were kind of thinking about it from a very math standpoint of like, can we predict waits? But they were thinking about it from a very kind of psychological, like buying is such a psychological thing. And they just wanted someone to kind of tell them that they weren't going to get screwed or like a better price kind of later down the road. They were like perfectly happy with buying. And so, yeah, we didn't kind of like, I think if we were going to kind of do that again, it's like we would go deeper into the like buying psychology of kind of like, what people's like anxiety was and why don't they buy stuff and like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think going back to my like initial like thought on this, I think the real reason why again is like it's just so easy to get lost if you're not like anchored or like focused on the problem. Yeah. Because like as founders, you're like, oh wait, I feel like it's like if you're not focused on the problem, you have to rediscover the customer problem every single time. Right?
Yeah.
And that makes it kind of like really difficult. Because you yourself don't feel it. And so you have to like constantly be out there talking to customers or else you'll just build something that kind of like nobody wants.
I think related to that, I wonder if you believe this. I feel like we've done this a lot together, but we've actually never like talked about it as much. I find that if you're focused on the problem and you're learning about the problem, your learnings compound much faster and like to much greater effect than if you have learnings about your solution. So for whatever reason, like I think if you are learning about your solution, that aggregated wealth of kind of knowledge like is not that valuable. It doesn't seem to compound as quickly. And it's kind of like what you're saying. It's like, okay, I learned a lot about my solution, but I still have to go learn about the problem every time I switch over. Whereas if you learned about the problem, you're like, I feel like everything you try after that is like, you're a little bit closer to kind of like product market fit and like trying to solve that part. Do you buy that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But I think the thing, I don't know, at least in like my head, it's like, you're always trying to solve something for some customer, right? And so you are like when you focus on the problem, you can anchor yourself on like a customer and what their pain point is. And the more that you can kind of like experiment, the deeper that your understanding of the customer. But then when you have a solution and you're trying to find a problem, then what you're doing is you're just trying to find, I don't know, you're trying to like test a lot of different customers. And that just tends to take longer and tends to be harder than focusing on one. I actually thought that was quite smart, and I just kind of like made it up. So
you have your moments. You have your moments.
Yeah. So I think that's what it is.
Okay, cool. I'm going to move on to the next question. Which is kind of very natural. Is like, why is it important to work on a good problem? And I think maybe we can talk a little bit about like how we think about what types of problems are good problems and what are bad problems, and like why is that all kind of important? Do you want to start?
I don't really understand this question, so you might want to start. Like, what would you say is like good? How do you define good?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's like, I think the previous question was like, hey, so why should you be so focused on the problem rather than the solution? And I think the next part is like, okay, so if you're supposed to be focused on the problem, like how do you know whether a problem is like worth solving and like worth building a startup around? So I think about it in kind of like a couple different dimensions. So I guess why is it important to work on a good problem? I think the thought I had here was that you and I played too many video games growing up. I feel like if you work on a bad problem, everything about the startup becomes like that much more difficult. So if I pick some very like problem space that maybe not a lot of people have, growth is way harder. Fundraising is then way harder. And then like building a product is also way harder because like, it's just not a problem that people really have. And they don't really want to solve, like they don't need to solve it. And I think something we talk a lot about when we look at startups is there are some startups that the problem is very obvious to everybody and they're solving that problem. And then there are some startups where they are educating people that they have a problem, and then they are also trying to solve that problem. And like, I would very much rather be in the like first part, not the second part, right? And so I just think if you are picking a good problem space, it just makes like everything in the startup kind of like that much easier. What do you think of that?
Ken, I'm so sorry. Jessica is stuck outside. I need to open the door for her.
Okay. Okay, we're back. Brian had to let his wife into the building. She got locked out?
I don't even want to talk about it.
Okay. So I think what we're talking about is that why is it important to kind of work on a problem? And I think I was just saying that like if you work on a good problem, I think just everything about the startup is that much easier. What do you kind of think?
Yeah, I have kind of like mixed thoughts on this, right? Because I think even in the Valley, people debate this all the time. The two lenses I think people think about is what is a good problem, right? Like a good problem is typically one where it's very painful and then lots of people have it. And so the kind of like metric that everyone looks at, or I don't know, thinks a lot about is TAM, right? So if a problem is really painful, then it's much easier to convert a user to your solution. And then if it's really, if a lot of people have it and it's really big, then you can build a really big company off of it. So I think that's the definition of a good problem. But I think like, I don't know if it's that important to like focus on good problems, right? Because like the other argument here is like, most really big companies start off as like really bad, like they look like toys, right? They just like don't. They solve something that looks like it's really small but end up being really big. Classic examples of this are, I mean, Airbnb was like really niche because they were just bed and breakfast, and we're like, who's gonna use this? Uber was basically just like luxury cars at the very beginning. Dropbox was Drew basically just wanted to like didn't have his data when he was traveling because it was in his thumb drive, or he forgot his thumb drive, and so I don't know. Personally, I kind of feel like it's good to think a little bit about the TAM and think a little bit about the customer, but I wouldn't put that much weight on it at the very beginning. I think it's more important that you actually solve a real problem rather than a problem that's like big, or I think it's more important that you solve a very painful problem than it is to solve a problem that looks really big.
Yeah, and I guess that's maybe kind of like what my definition of like a good problem is, right? And so I think I have like three, and you kind of touched on a lot of it, which is like reach. So how many people does this problem affect? And then impact, which is how painful is the problem? And then I have this like third part, which is like feasibility, which is just like how easy or hard is this problem to kind of like solve? And you know, if we take the extremes of this to kind of illustrate the point, it's like, you know, I think I literally said this in one of our partner meetings, which is like if you solve Alzheimer's, for example, right? It's like most people don't have Alzheimer's, but like the impact for the people who have it is like huge, right? So that's kind of like a useful problem. And then there are things like, I think like Facebook, Instagram, they fall into the like everybody, it touches everybody. It kind of like, you know, we can argue like how painful of a problem it was for people, but it was like the reach is so big, so that ends up kind of being useful. And so I think about it in three kind of like pillars of like how to find maybe kind of problems. What do you think of my three?
I mean, I think, let's see. I mean, the two things you had, reach and impact, and the third one was feasibility. I guess I personally don't think that much about feasibility, and I feel like I should, right? Because I feel like, I don't know, I don't work on a lot of companies that are very kind of like technology bound. And so typically there are some, I don't know, for companies that we've built, like typically there's probably like some iteration or permutation of a solution that works. Right. But I think in other industries where I don't know, you need to like discover some quantum computing or something, right? Or like kind of like more hardcore deep tech stuff, then that becomes like the thing that's most important. Because I don't know, if you solve quantum computing or like space elevators or something, right? Like the TAM is like massive already and very impactful, so you don't have to think about those things. Yeah. So I think they're good. The feasibility hasn't applied to, I think, me personally, or like us personally.
Yeah. I think feasibility can come in different parts too. It could be like financial, right? It just is like very capital intensive. It could be regulatory. It's a reason why a lot of people like neobanks were not started initially until kind of the more recently, because there's just a lot of regulatory things. So I think the feasibility is like, there's like technically hard, and then there's like, all the other stuff that kind of goes with it. Yeah. Okay, cool. I debate this in my head all the time. Do you believe founders need to have the problem themselves? I know YC's like PG was like very big on like, you need to have the problem yourself, otherwise how do you know? But like, I don't know if I agree. Where do you come out?
I kind of feel like my answer on this is like, if you're a first time founder, you should try to solve your own problems. Because I think it's just like, it's so difficult to try to solve another person's problem because you just need the like discipline, the structure, the like reps under your belt to like understand how this whole like customer discovery plus like product market fit system works. And so I think the likelihood of you succeeding in solving your own problems when it's your first company is just much higher. But that doesn't mean you can't, I don't know, try to solve other people's problems. You just have to be like very structured or like very thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I feel kind of similarly. I think it's like, I hadn't thought about the first time founders should solve their own thing, but that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's certainly easier if you have the problem yourself. But it seems like if you if you don't have that problem, you just need to spend a lot more effort really trying to understand your customers, since it's kind of not you. I was trying to think about examples of companies where the founder did not initially kind of like have the problem. Do you know of any? I mean, I feel like there's probably lots of examples of founders who had the problem, but big companies who didn't have the problem. Pinterest. I don't think Ben had that problem.
Yeah, Pinterest.
Drew did, I guess.
Flickr was a game, right? Like Slack initially was a game. And so they kind of like were able to like pivot their way out of it. So I think there's definitely lots of good examples. But I mean, you could also say that they. I don't think Flickr was their first time either, right? And Slack wasn't at all.
I mean,
so,
yeah. I mean, Stuart started Flickr, right? I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's definitely examples of everything. But yeah, I think the main kind of like thought here, right, is like when like what's the thing that matters the most in early day kind of like startups? It's like iteration speed, right? So when you're solving your own problems, you kind of like have these like gut feelings of like what should work and what shouldn't work. It's like you have such a visceral experience of the problem, and so you're able to like iterate much faster. When you're trying to solve someone else's problem, it's like every time you try to change something, then you have to go to like 20 other people and be like, oh, what did you think about this? And so I think the customer discovery part is just kind of like just takes longer. And so I think that's why, I don't know, and it's much easier to kind of like stray away and build the wrong things because you're not the consumer of it. So I don't know, if you want speed to be your friend, I would say try to solve something that you personally have experience with.
And I think just to add on to that, I think just to unpack that a little bit for people, it's like, I think, you know, you and I definitely both agree that iteration speed is kind of the biggest part. And oftentimes your iteration speed is bound by how tight your feedback loop is. And there's like no tighter feedback loop than just you yourself. Like you can like build something and like look at it and be like, okay, yeah, this is good or this is bad. And so if that isn't you, then the feedback loop just gets a little bit longer, right? If you like build something, then you got to go talk to a bunch of people, then you got to come back, which is like not impossible. You just got to work a little bit harder to kind of make sure that's the case. So maybe that's the way to kind of like think about that.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. How do you look for a good problem? So, I mean, I guess this is the whole thing around, I think a lot of, I've been calling them future founders or potential founders. Like, you know, something we hear a lot about is like, oh, you know, I'd love to kind of do a startup, but like, I don't have an idea, which kills me every time because I feel like there's so many ideas. Like I have this huge like personal list of just like ideas. But I also recognize that like, I think once you start like looking at the world in a certain way, then it all kind of pops out. So maybe kind of like share a little bit about like how you kind of generate ideas or kind of like look for stuff. And then I can kind of do the same and hopefully it'll be helpful for people.
Yeah. I think people try too hard to like generate ideas.
Yeah, totally. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. The like practical thing I've done is I actually have a journal. And instead of generating ideas, you're generating, again, like just problems, right? So like, I don't know. Looking back, I kind of feel like it came really naturally to me, but maybe like it doesn't for other people. I just get frustrated all the time with like stuff in the world. I'm like, why is this? I don't know. Why does it take so long for me to get money from my bank, right? Or like, why? I don't know. Like, why do people do it this way? Or like, why? I don't know. Why is like Comcast support so shitty, right? And it's like,
just throwing Comcast under the bus.
Yeah. But it's like, as you're like experiencing the day, many times I just get frustrated about like random stuff. And so I'll like note it down. I'll be like, okay, this is something I'm frustrated with. This is like, I don't know, something I want to fix in the future. But then you're not like generating ideas. You're just like, there's this thing that's like really painful. And I think the other thing people don't do very well is they don't apply that same thing for their work. And so like you're sitting at work, You're working for a bank or you're working like for a hospital. And then the thought that comes to mind is like, oh, that's just the way things are. Right. And you're like, you need to get that out of your head as an entrepreneur. And you can be like, why is it that I can't get data on my patients in, like, why does it take 20 minutes for me to get data on my patients? And so I don't know. I think my secret, I don't know if it's a secret, it's just like, I'm just angry and frustrated about stuff all the time because it's like so inefficient.
I feel like what you're saying is like, don't accept that the world is the way it is and needs to be that way, right? Like, I think we used to joke about this as like traffic, right? I think most people, when they think about traffic, they're like, there's a lot of traffic. That's kind of how the world is. But like, that's not a law of physics, right? Like the rules of physics doesn't dictate that there must be traffic. And so you don't take those. I want to dig into your journal because I don't think I knew this. Like, is it a physical journal?
No, it literally is a physical journal. Like, I have a physical journal, and I'll write down, like, in the periods, me and Hsu Ken both have had this, right? In the periods of times when I call it the vision questing, like when we're in between companies and we're kind of like thinking about what to like build next, I literally have a physical journal and I'll write down times when I'm frustrated with stuff. I should find this so I can like give people the examples.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what do you typically? So you carry it with you, kind of like around, or it's just like on your desk, and as you're doing stuff, you're like, "This is dumb." Like, customer support sucks. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I've done both. So I had a physical journal when we did the whole like traveling thing. So we went to like Vietnam, we went to like Singapore, most Southeast Asia kind of like countries, and I just had a physical journal as I was like experiencing the world, and then I like wrote down stuff. I also, I take a lot of notes on Evernote. I'm struggling because I don't want to recommend Evernote. I don't think it's the best, but I've take notes on there.
You've been on Evernote for so long.
I know, so long. I have like a running list of kind of like Evernote, just kind of like frustration, I don't know, bullet points.
What do you do with the journal? Like, do you look through it kind of like, when you're working on a startup, that journal kind of goes in the closet, I'm sure, and kind of like, you're kind of like all in on one. But do you kind of like look through it kind of periodically and you're like, oh yeah, and then you kind of like think about it for a moment?
I think totally. I definitely look at it. One thing I've noticed though is like 2 or 3 days later, I'll look back at something. I'm like, that's so dumb. It's like, yeah. So you end up crossing off maybe like, I want to say like 99% of the stuff, and you're like, okay, I think when you start digging into it, you're like, oh, I thought that was a problem, but I could have solved it this way. Or like, maybe you start looking for solutions. You're like, oh, someone already did something for this, right? Is it really that big of a problem? So I think when I don't know, I feel like the journal is really good for catching like fleeting moments for you to kind of like anchor off of. But then you go through the like evaluation and the vetting process, and then you can cross off a ton of stuff.
That's actually an important thing. Like, you don't want to filter too early, right? Like, I think you want to just be like, you just observe things and kind of write them down. If you come in with like, is this going to be a good startup idea? Like, I think most stuff gets like thrown out the window, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that filter is like not helpful at that stage. And so your journal is basically like, hey, like write everything down, and then my like logical brain will go and filter that out later.
Yeah. I think the other thing people don't realize is like the thing you want to optimize for is the number of problems. In very early days, right? Because the thing that you're looking for, I think, is I don't know if this is right, but let me just say it. I think you're looking for like, do you experience this problem all the time? Like you're putting together tons of problems, and then you're like, oh, is it that you're looking for something that's like fairly high frequency, right? It either needs to be like high frequency and, I don't know, mediocre kind of like pain, or like extremely painful, that you want to like dig really deep into it. So I think the kind of like over time aspect of it, and the kind of like giving yourself room for like 3 to 6 months of room where you're like thinking about this thing like all the time, is important for, I don't know, evaluating or vetting. I don't know if that was like on point or not. Do you agree, or do you disagree?
No, I totally think it is. I think I feel like for this, like, for me personally, I think for looking for good problems, it's like, that's definitely one of them. So, one of the things that I think about sometimes is like, you want to be really curious. And I think that's to the point of just like, you're just like, hey, why is it like this? And you want to kind of do that. And then the other part that I think a lot about too, and I think this is harder as I've gotten older, is like, I kind of want to be weirder and I want to hang out with weird people. And what I mean by that is like, there's always these, and typically for me, that just tends to be like super nerdy people. And like, oftentimes I ask myself, like, what are really super nerdy people into right now? And like, because that ends up being like a reasonable predictor of what's going to be like interesting in the future. Like crypto was, we started hearing about crypto when we were doing Decide. It was like 2012, right? 2013. It was like, hey, these people are like doing this crypto thing and they're like getting miners. And we used to joke about like, should we do that? And like, I mean, we definitely should have done that. We like did not do that, but we should have. And I think that was like this part of the tech community that was like really nerdy crypto, like cryptography people, right? And so sometimes I think about just like, there's these subcultures in society where it's like, I kind of want to go see where these kinds of like subcultures are, because they're often into something that is like most people aren't into. And like, and I think that stuff is really interesting. And so I think for me, it's like just exposing yourself, being very curious and exposing yourself to maybe things that are a little bit outside of the norm. Because I think that's, to me, the norm is in society is often what some of these subcultures were into like 5 years ago. It gets like moved into the mainstream, right? So if you want to kind of see outside. So I think
there's also like an adjacent kind of like
Yeah.
point. I agree with that. The adjacent point of kind of like you have tons of experiences in your life, and then what you want to do is you like the most interesting innovations are ones where it's like crossover, right?
Yeah.
Between like, I don't know, like chemistry and technology, right? Or like some places where kind of like not a lot of people have kind of like explored.
Yeah.
And so when you expose yourself to like new things, that's when you get to apply the stuff that you already know into like a new field. So
Yeah.
those are like interesting ways to like discover.
And I think, I used to, we're big on 2x2s. I remember thinking about a 2x2 for this, and I remember thinking this like years ago, and I'm curious if you think it's smart. I thought I was super smart when I thought of this before, but there's lots of things I thought I was really smart at before, and now I'm just like, that wasn't that smart. I often think about problems in the 2x2 of how obvious the problem is and how difficult the problem is. And so if you kind of play out the 2x2, obviously, I think most obvious, easy problems are already kind of done. So I think maybe like Web 1.0, there was probably a lot of like obvious, easy problems. So I don't know, like, I don't know. Would I put e-commerce as obvious and easy? I don't know if it's that easy, but like, I don't know. It seems, I guess, obvious in retrospect. And then the other quadrant that most people stay away from, and for good reason, is the not obvious and hard problems. Those are, I mean, they're just hard and not obvious. So it's like most people don't hunt there. And so I often think a lot about hunting in the other two quadrants, which are obvious problems, but are kind of hard to solve, or not obvious problems that are easy to solve. And I always think that Elon Musk is the like king of the obvious but hard problems. Like I feel like SpaceX is like, it's an obvious problem, it's just really hard to solve, and he takes that one, and it's like, Tesla, same, right? Like I think we were all kind of like, cars don't totally kind of work, but like I'm not going to invent a car, so I feel like he's the king of that. So I think of those two buckets a lot, and I think to what you're saying, like.
Wait, sorry. Sorry, I have to stop you. Who's the king of the other one? The like non-obvious, easy problems. Is that like Instagram, or is that
you know who comes to mind with me for this is Evan Williams, because like putting
all the like blogging content, yeah,
it's like communication, like Instagram, Facebook, like all the social stuff to me are like not obvious, but like easy. I mean, like we could code Blogger in like a month, right? But it's like, it's all the social stuff tends to fall into that bucket. And they're just, and honestly, I don't know if my strategy for that bucket is you just have to experiment a lot, because I think with social, it's like, it's really hard to do first principles to come up with good products in social. It's like, I think a lot of experimentation, you like try stuff. I don't know. Who do you think is the like king of that bucket?
Oh no, I didn't have an answer, so I just wanted to
Okay.
see.
Where do you think we have been most of the time?
Maybe just dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no. I mean, I think we're closer to like the iterate fast, right? Experiment with a lot of things, etc. So
Yeah, I think I think we've been more in the like not obvious ones, and
yeah,
kind of like the solution is, I mean, it's like not literal rocket science, right? So I think we've been in that one, which is interesting because I think a lot of first time founders definitely play in that bucket, and I think they tend to move to the other bucket as they get older. Like they just know how to kind of like solve problems and stuff. Um, so I often think about that two by two, and I think it's the long-winded way to kind of get to what you're saying, which is if you expose yourself to kind of like more experiences, then you have a greater breadth of what is obvious, right? So something that is like not obvious to me may be very obvious to you, and I think the more perspective you have and the more experiences you have, your surface area for what is obvious kind of like increases.
yeah. Kind of want to make another point, not related to problems. I think a lot of people. Okay, you can stop me if this is like a bad answer, but a lot of people don't have a 10x solution. Like once you identify a problem, you don't have like a 10x solution. I think oftentimes another mistake people run into is like you're solving a problem with people can already solve their problem with, I don't know, WordPress, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a great example, but it's like your thing is just not 10x better. So it's like I'm not going to switch to whatever you're doing because like it's just not that good.
Yeah.
And so I do think like once you identify something, there is the whole kind of like, let's make sure I can solve have a solution that's like, much better than what exists today.
Yeah, which, I mean, I feel like, it's a really good point. We should dig into it more because I feel like, no, what I was going to say is like, we could definitely do a whole podcast about that, but like just to dig into it like a little bit more, because I think it is like topical to this. I feel like there's 2 points here. One is that like switching costs is higher than people think, especially I think first time entrepreneurs. Like nobody's going to switch their product for like 10% better, 20% better, even like 40% better. They just won't switch. And so I think your 10x thing is kind of to that. I think the other point too is when people think of solutions, they often think about like other products that look like them. And I think what ends up happening, I don't know who said this, but people said it in the Valley all the time. Your biggest competitor is probably Excel or Google Sheets for a lot of companies, right? And so I think a lot of times when we hear companies talk about stuff, it's like, oh yeah, there's no product that like does this. And we're like, okay, so well, what do people do now? And like, oh, well, they use Google Sheets. It's like, that's your competitor, right? Like that is going to be the thing that you're going to compete against. And so I think when you're thinking about 10x solutions, you have to include what people are doing now, not necessarily just like what products kind of exist.
Yeah. I think the classic example is actually sticky notes. It's like out of everything that we've done in tech, like we still haven't gotten rid of sticky notes because they are so effective and so easy to use.
You still use sticky notes?
What? I use sticky notes all the time.
Really? What do you use them for?
I think it's just really fast to like put down ideas, move them around, and then like eliminate things, right? Categorize and eliminate things. And it's much faster than like typing and copying and pasting. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never been a big sticky note person, so I don't know.
Nice. I don't use it that much by myself, but like when you're like with teams, I think gets used all the time.
Yeah, I think the moving around, like physically being able to move ideas around, there's something very powerful to that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's been replicated that well online. Okay, cool. There was, one other way that I kind of do this, which I think about sometimes this is the very top-down approach, which is I think about what's going to happen in the future and I work backwards from that. I don't know. I don't know. Do you do this at all?
Go deeper first, and then I'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, what I do is that I think about what is going to be true at some point in the future and is not true now. So, like a good example of this is like I tend to believe that self-driving cars will be like ubiquitous in the future. We can debate whether it's like 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, but like it's going to happen. And so I think about how the world is going to change when that happens. So there's two ways. Like if I believe that self-driving cars are going to be a thing, I could definitely go work on self-driving cars, like very directly. I can go work on that. The other part to it is I can think about the second and third order impacts of it. So if everybody has self-driving cars, like what happens to the insurance industry, or what happens to ownership, and what happens to like financing, and like all of the like things that are built around self-driving cars? And can I work on some of those problems, because I know it's going to kind of happen? No, I personally think self-driving cars are probably like I feel like there's a moment when we thought they were imminent, and they're like clearly not imminent. So I probably wouldn't work on a self-driving car insurance thing. But I do think about that sometimes, where I'm just thinking about the future coming back. Like I think remote work is like an obvious one that has become kind of like, everybody that has been thinking about remote work for a while is like suddenly kind of like it's in the present. So I don't know. Do you think about that at all?
I mean, I feel like I do now. I'll give two answers, right? I think the reason why that's really interesting is because like in every decade, right? Or like in every year, maybe, like some really big trend is happening. So just to give examples, like I never would have started this company, but like 7 years ago, the big trend that was happening was DNA sequencing costs were coming down really drastically. Like every single year, I think every other year or so, it's kind of like one magnitude drop in price.
Yep.
And so like as trends are happening, I think trying to think about kind of like what's going to happen 2 or 3 years from now is interesting, because I don't know, technology is very like exponential, right? So I think that happens. I mean, the big trend now is like COVID, right? So it's like everything is virtual. What happens with like, I'm just going to pick insurance again. What happens with insurance when when nobody's out driving or something? I think the thing I say though is like, just make sure that's not like a trap again, right? Because it's like you don't want to get into something that's not like you don't personally feel the pain, and you don't personally know how to like kind of like navigate a company, or like you're not passionate about the problem that you're trying to solve. And so it's very good that kind of like something is sticks to like a trend, but again, like oftentimes early startups fail because not because you're not part of the trend, it's because you just don't know what you're doing. Like you don't know what the problem is, you don't know what you're building, and so you're not like building anything that matters.
I think the other trap with that too is that you need to be right on timing, right? So that method is like you need to be right on your like timing of that, and timing is like so hard. Like I don't know, like I think like I feel like you've been hot on VR for like years now, right? And it's like it hasn't moved as fast as you thought it was going to.
No, I still try to get in there every week or so to be like, what's new? Like what's interesting here? But yeah, it definitely has not picked up quite yet.
I guess so I feel like that's a trap, right? Like you have to be careful of the timing there. To your point about kind of like macro trends, I feel like the biggest macro trend was like from the last generation to the generation before that is that computing was just going to get miniaturized. I feel like that was a huge thing. Like if you were thinking hard about that, there's like so many things that came from that, right? I don't know what the next thing like that is going to look like. All right. Okay, next question, which I just added in here because I know part of the story. I think maybe it's helpful for people if we kind of talk about where some of our, like, I mean, we started a couple companies, like where maybe some of those problems kind of like came from. I think you talked about the Decide one a little bit, which was, I mean, I don't think it was just like a very real problem that your wife had, and we just tried to kind of like solve that. And to me, that story is very much like we pulled on a thread and the thread kept like coming. And so we just like went all the way down that hole. How do you think about the weave problem that we were trying to solve?
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll start. You can fill in the holes.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know if we've eventually, I don't know if eventually, we've had a couple incarnations. The closest way to describe it is it's kind of like Tinder for networking, which was kind of like you swipe on people. If there was like a double opt-in, we would match you. You would go on a professional coffee date. I think the thing that kind of like started it for me was me and Hsu Ken sold our company. We had both just moved to the Bay Area, and when you're moving to someplace new, you know like nobody. And so being the kind of like engineers that we were like, okay, cool. What's the fastest way to meet a lot of people really quickly? And I think we were just like super nerdy, and we were like, oh, this. So again, I feel like you kind of showed me Tinder at some point.
I did.
Okay.
I remember specifically what was happening.
Yeah. And we were just like, but I don't think we started there though, right? Like I think we started with trying to match people up in Seattle, maybe. But like I think the problem that we were trying to solve is like we're going to someplace new. We want to meet a bunch of people. We don't know anybody there. How do we make this happen? How do we make it kind of like automatic? So that was the problem that we were trying to solve. And I think throughout the history of the company, I think we tried like 4 or 5 different things. And I think, I don't know, we have learnings from each one of them, but obviously it was like a company that didn't become super big for us. There's other people now working on it. And so, I mean, I believe it's still like a very real problem. We never found the like right permutation for it to be like a really big company.
Yeah, I feel like, so, I mean, I think for audience too, where we started out as kind of Tinder for professional networking, and where we ended up was basically what Lunch Club is kind of doing right now.
Yeah.
I think Lunch Club just released from Andreessen. And so I think that's where we kind of ended up. Our joke has been since then that like, I guess we just needed a global pandemic for it to really kind of like catch on with people.
Yeah.
So we should have just stayed alive until then. Or kept going until then. And I think what ended up happening, at least my part of the story, is when we started working on startups, I think we didn't have that much of a network. Like we didn't know a lot of founders, and we didn't know a lot of people doing startups. I think you knew more than me, but like I knew like none, right? I think you knew like Zillow people and maybe some like UWCS people, but we didn't know a lot. And so I think we were like trying to solve all these problems by ourselves, and we were like first-time founders and just didn't know anybody. And didn't have a good way to kind of meet people. And then I think once we started raising money and we like got some funding from Androna, like I think the network opened up quite a lot, because I think people were like, oh, okay, these guys are like, somewhat legit, whatever. And so I think we had that in the back of our minds. And then we were thinking about moving to San Francisco, and we were like, man, it's going to be like the same thing all over again. And I think we were talking about that a lot. I mean, you really liked networking. I was the one who was like, I don't know. And then I think I ended up showing you Tinder, because Tinder was getting quite big. And I actually literally remember it. I was like showing it to you, and you're like, oh, this UX is really interesting. And I was like, yeah, you can like start swiping. You like download the app, and within 30 seconds, you're like swiping. And I remember you were skeptical that anybody would actually respond. You were like, there's no way people respond.
Yeah.
And I handed you my phone. I was like, message everybody I like, swipe for me, message people that I like matched with. And we were driving somewhere, and basically like you just said hi to like 25 people. You're just like, hi. And you were getting responses back in the car ride, and you were like, oh, like people do respond on this. And then I think we started kind of like thinking about the professional networking thing.
Yeah.
But I think it was born out of that, like, we didn't really kind of know a lot of people when we started, and we kind of wanted to like, we were moving somewhere else. We kind of wanted to do that. And then the whole Tinder part was just like experimental, like we were like trying stuff. So I think that was that one. And then, I mean, I feel like how do you think about the Divvy one? I remember you were like trying to buy a place once. Is that actually where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the Divvy one came from. Divvy, I feel like, is like not the best example, right? Because it was my like third company. I was really trying hard to build $1 billion company. Divvy will be $1 billion company, by the way. But like the story there was, I'll tell it really quick because I don't know how applicable it is. I was trying to buy a house, and when founders try to buy homes, typically banks are like, they don't give you mortgages because you don't have any income. And even if you have income, like you probably don't have like 2 years of income or steady income, etc. That again got me like really frustrated and angry, because I was like, I'm probably a really good person. I have quite a bit of assets. Like I feel like if I wanted to, I could make good, steady money. Like, why are you not giving me a loan?
You were good risk.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, they were underwriting. I was clearly good risk, and they didn't. The banks don't realize it. And so I think I just got like again, like I got really frustrated and I started looking at mortgages really deeply. Spent just kind of like months and months on end just trying to figure out kind of like how did this happen? Like how did the mortgage industry get to like where it is now? Did a bunch of research, blah blah, and then I think got to the realization that it was just kind of like, I don't know if the right word is broken, but it was designed for a different era. Like it was designed for like 1940s or like 1935 or whatever. And
which is when it was designed, right?
Yeah. It's like in 1935, we didn't have like bank accounts that were digital. We didn't have this like concept of like you could form LLCs and invest with your friends, right? We didn't have like a bunch of infrastructure. So what would like a new way of kind of like designing and underwriting people look like was kind of like the problem space. The reason why I think this is kind of like a bad example is because I started asking all these questions, and then I basically went through this process of like experimenting with like a ton of different solutions, and then it led me down the path of like lots of different solutions and also lots of different customer bases that I was testing it on. So just for those out there, I thought about it as a really structured search process. So to try to get to like product market fit. So around 2 weeks or so, I would like throw out a new idea, test it, do discovery, kind of like come back with a solution, decide whether I would take another 2 weeks or not. And so I think, I don't know, I think you have to have quite a bit of kind of like discipline because it was really hard to do that. And I would definitely not like recommend it for people. I
feel like we should do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, we should do a whole
definitely do that. We definitely didn't do that the first one or two startups, and now I feel like that process is so important.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I think I got to right is like the Divvy solution it like half solves my problem, but like really it solves the problem of this is by design, right? It solves the problem of the majority of Americans, the majority of kind of like people in the world who struggle to save money to go buy a house, right? So the Divvy solution wasn't actually kind of like a thing like towards the end. The incarnation today is not like a product for me. It's a product for kind of like way more people. So I think I think it was good, but yeah, not the right kind of like example for.
I actually think it's like a really good example and here's why. Because I think it's like you had a problem yourself, right? And so you started pulling on that there, and you were like looking at that problem, and then you started kind of like working on, okay, like who else has this problem, and where you ended up was basically like solving a problem that more people had, right? And so on some level, it's like it's really good. You started with the problem that you had, and then you just found out that like, hey, more people have this kind of like other problem. And my problem was just a subset of this like larger set of problems. Let me go work on this like larger set of problems. So I think from that standpoint, like it's kind of perfect because I think a lot of people who are going to think about starting like companies and stuff, like a good problem probably looks like that, right? So you have a problem yourself, and then that is like, I almost think about if you're mining and you're like, you find a little bit of gold and then you like dig a little bit deeper and you find this like cavern of gold and you're like, oh, whoa, I didn't know about all of this. Like, let's go down there.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of good. I can give my quick thing about how I ended up at Workmate, like that, working on that problem. I don't think I've ever talked to you about this. So when I first got to Singapore, I didn't have like an idea. I wasn't working. I had no job. I wasn't like planning on doing stuff. And so I was kind of looking for problems to work on. And one of the things that I did was I wanted to work on something that was B2B related. Like I just wanted to work on stuff that had revenue from the beginning. I think we did enough social companies and like consumer companies that were like, no, I don't want to do that. And so what I did is I started asking out all my friends who work in different industries to lunch and dinner. And I just like wanted to like have them talk about what they do and kind of like the problems there. And I often think about what we do as like, we're just problem solvers and tool makers, but we need to go out there and kind of find people's stuff. So I was like, I remember talking to my dad who works in manufacturing, and he was like, hey, you should come to my factory and I'll just like implant you with kind of different teams and do that. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me dig in there. And the one that ended up being, I worked on this idea called single shift for a while, and then it became workmate was I was having lunch with my friend who owned a couple restaurants, and I was like, hey, like talk to me about kind of like the restaurants and like what problems you have kind of running restaurants. And he was talking about POS stuff, and he was talking about analytics, and I was like, okay, yeah. And then he like got a phone call, and he was like, hey, I gotta go take this. And he was like outside, and he's like busy and kind of like agitated, and he like comes back inside, and he was like, I was like, hey, what's going on? And he was like, oh man, like I had 2 people that were supposed to work the like night shift tonight, and they like just canceled me, so now I gotta like go scramble and go find all these people and whatever. And I was like, wait, like I can help you with that, right? Like if I just have a huge list of people, I can like send that out to people. He's like, oh, seriously? Like that'd be great. Like, you know, and it was funny because he didn't list that as one of his problems. Like I literally spent an hour talking about problems, and he didn't list that as a problem. He just happened to get the phone call. And I think he didn't list that as a problem because he thought that was just the way the world was. He's like, you own restaurants, people bail. That's how it is. Like, it's not worth kind of making it as a problem. And so sometimes I think for people like us, it's like, those are the problems we want to work on, where it's like, you just assume that this is kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's how we ended up with that one.
Interesting. I love that this podcast just ended up being us talking about our companies.
I guess so. Because I think part of it is like, I mean, we can talk about theoretical things and kind of frameworks, but I think it's helpful to sometimes kind of like ground it in actual stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully it won't be like this, like 10 episodes in where it's still just us talking about ourselves. Okay, in closing, I have a surprise last question that has nothing to do with any of this. Brian doesn't know what this question is. Brian and I play a fair bit of StarCraft.
Oh, this is great.
My last question to you is, what is your favorite race and why?
Oh, interesting.
So Brian plays random most of the time, which is he chooses one of the 3 random races. But I on the spot, on the record, want him to choose his favorite race and tell me why.
I think I choose random because I'm indecisive. But if I were to choose my favorite race, it would probably be Zergs.
Okay, I feel like that was going to be my guess.
Yeah, because Zergs are super macro, and I don't know, I just like the swarm. I like map control and swarm, so that's gonna be mine.
Okay. So do you feel like you're a macro person?
I suck at macroing, but I like to feel like that I'm good.
Okay, got it. When are we going to do the entire podcast about what StarCraft has taught us about startups?
Maybe the next one. People should stay tuned.
Okay. Okay, cool. I think that's it. Thanks everybody for tuning into the first episode. If anybody has, I mean, we've got a bunch of kind of episodes kind of planned with different entrepreneurs, and we'll get back on. And maybe the next one that you and I get on is about how to validate ideas and kind of come up with solutions. But if there are things that people want to hear about, or topics or questions and that kind of stuff, you can just email us at hello@iterative.vc. And we basically see all of those emails. So I think if you have any topics and stuff that you guys want to see, email us there. Thanks.
All right.